everybody, and welcome to my service learning project. The first thing you need to know is I'm Lauren, and generally, people over the age of 60 make me really uncomfortable. It's not something I like about myself necessarily, but I grew up with no grandparents nearby, no one of that age around me. My parents and sister and I live in Colorado, and the rest of my family's on the East Coast. So when I was growing up, the only interaction I really had with anyone, any older adults like that, was through the phone, as my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, kind of descended into Alzheimer's. So my association is getting old is dementia, my mom crying, a lot of stress. Um, so that's kind of where I'm coming from for this project. And it started for me in the second class where Dr. Westland talked about her friend who needed someone to help sort his mail. And he was an older man who lived in a retirement or assisted living community. And I thought, oh God, there's no way I'm doing that. And I didn't say anything during class. And I went home and I thought about it, and I realized that the best way for me to get a lot out of this experience would be to do something that I would never voluntarily do, and do something out of my comfort zone. So the next morning I kind of sat on it, and I emailed Dr. Westland and I asked if anyone else had talked to her about working with her friend, and she said no. And as soon as she said that, I immediately regretted emailing her because I realized I was kind of terrified. But I decided to go for it. So my service learning project was to help her friend Robert organize his mail, clean up his apartment, that kind of stuff. And his story is that he, as Dr. Westland told it, kind of had no friends or family around. He was just kind of lonely, and it'd be good for him to have some help. So I called him and I went, and the first time, admittedly, it was really uncomfortable for me. It was hard for me to spend time in a retirement community. It was hard for me to just show up and spend time with someone who I didn't know, who I didn't have anything in common with. And I knew it would be a challenge. And so I knew I was on the right track. And so I kept going. I've spent quite a bit of time with him now. And so I would go over there, and the job was to help him sort mail, organize boxes. But what it turned into every time was about 2 hours of just telling stories and talking, and talking about his wife who had passed away, talking about his kids who lived in other states, talking about a lot about his job, childhood stories. And the more we talked, the more I think I developed a lot of empathy, and I developed a relationship with him. And, we became, I guess I would call us friends. So it turned out to be a pretty amazing experience. I think I'm probably still going to spend time with him. Every time I go, he tries to pay me. And so far, I've only allowed him to do that once, which was the first time. Um, but it's been kind of an amazing experience for me, just learning that deeper sense of empathy and learning how to listen, um, because me being there really isn't about what I respond. I don't tell stories about myself. It's a very one-sided conversation, but that's exactly what he needs, and he needs social interaction. So he told me about what happened with him, and he was basically having some health problems. He lived with his daughter, but his daughter was moving, I believe. And his family basically stepped in and said, you can't live alone. You can't live with your daughter anymore. So we're going to get you into a home. And he kind of wasn't big on it. And they came back and gave him like 2 days to move in. So he's only 65, and he moved into this retirement residence facility where most of the residents are 80, 85. They're in wheelchairs. And he's still relatively young despite some health problems, but he's having a really hard time finding anyone to talk to. And he talked to me about how he went down to bingo and he didn't like anybody and they didn't really appreciate his sense of humor. So a lot of the day he's spending alone in his room with his cat, watching TV, and he goes down for meals, but it doesn't sound like he really has friends there, and he's just lonely and really wanted someone to talk to. So for me, the learning process was difficult and it was a little bit uncomfortable. But once I realized and I kind of humanized that aspect of it, it felt really good to be that person to just sit and talk with him for a few hours once a week and listen to the stories and, all the trouble he got into as a kid on a farm in Lakewood, and his job, and, being a father and what that meant to him. And it was kind of an amazing experience. And as I went through, I kept kind of thinking about what theorists came to mind. And the biggest one and the most obvious, I think, is Maslow, the hierarchy of needs. So, we have this man who he's fed, he has a place to live, he's safe, he's warm, he has all those kind of very basic needs covered. But when we get to the social level, his life is very much lacking. And, that's where I came in and I think gave him that social outlet to talk about, to tell his stories, and just to have some human interaction with someone um, that listened, I think, and that he felt, wanted to hear his stories. So it was very cool. And the second theorist that I think is my go-to is Viktor Frankl, who's the existentialist theorist. And I think the reason I connect it to him so much is because Frankl talks a lot about finding meaning even through suffering. Um, and I think a lot of people associate meaning, or they find meaning in their jobs, their families, their friends. But, here's a man who isn't working anymore. He lives far from his family. And although he is, he's close to his family, they're not nearby. So his closeness is, through a phone call. So, how do you find meaning in that? And how do you find optimism in that? And, Viktor Frankl would say that there's always meaning in suffering and you just have to find it. And it's a really important part of being human. So I think Maslow and Frankl kind of also gave me a depth to my experience with him. And yeah, so I think for me personally, it was a personal challenge, which was really awesome. But I think it was also important because I looked up some statistics on the number of people over the age of 60. And there's going to be a lot. So I want to be able to deal with that and to be able to help them and work with them effectively without dealing with my own issues. And in 2020, there's going to be over almost 76 million people over the age of 60 in the United States. By 2030, it's 92 million. By 2050, it's 112 million. So I think we've all heard that we're an aging population, but it's true, and it's something I think as in the profession we're in, we all need to prepare for. Um, so I think I learned that underneath my discomfort is a lot of empathy and maybe trepidation. Um, but I liked what I learned about myself in this project, and I felt really good about what I did, and I feel like I did contribute to the happiness of another person, which felt really good. Even though his basic needs were covered, I know that adding that social aspect was really important, and I think maybe brightened his life quite a bit. And we are still working on getting his bills in order, but admittedly, we're behind on that because every time I go, we just end up talking. So it was a great experience, and I hope all of you had similarly great experiences.